President Kennedy first sent Americans to Vietnam in 1961, he did so with the conviction that America was the natural leader of the free world. Inspired by their charismatic young president, many ordinary Americans, too, felt it was their duty to champion democracy around the world.
I guess we all just pretty much believed in what we were doing. I wanted to go to Vietnam because it was just what John Kennedy had talked about in 1961, about bearing any burden and supporting any friend, and to me it was just an extension of what he had talked about.
So with unshakable confidence in the righteousness of their cause, America went to war. Their objective? To stop what they saw as the dangerous spread of world communism.
All communists in the world were working together, and their job was, in the end, to overthrow the United States, and that the way to defeat those communists, or at least to hold the line against them, was containment.
Vietnam was a divided country. The mission of US forces was to support the government of the South by containing the communist North. This was far from straightforward. The Americans had to fight the regular North Vietnamese army, but they also faced communist-supported guerrillas inside South Vietnam, the Viet Cong. By 1968, there were nearly 500,000 American soldiers in South Vietnam. The battle had already been long and bloody, but US commanders were now confident that victory was almost at hand. It was the eve of the Tet Lunar New Year, and the streets of the South Vietnamese capital, Saigon, were busy with holiday traffic. Then, suddenly, everything changed. All over Saigon, Viet Cong fighters launched surprise attacks on American and South Vietnamese posts.
And the significance of attack wasn't just that all of a sudden here was an attack, it's where the attack occurred, which is now the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese insurgents were attacking the cities.
It wasn't just Saigon. There were hundreds of attacks in every major town and city in the country. The Viet Cong were trying to provoke a popular uprising to overturn the South Vietnamese regime. The Tet Offensive of 1968 did prove to be the turning point of the Vietnam War. Just not in the way the Viet Cong planned. The newsreels reflect the optimism, at first, of those who went to fight Kennedy's war.
I believe what we're fighting for freedom. It's something that we all value. And I think we're doing the right thing in this.
The guerrillas and the civilians being together mixed was always a great problem. We were aware of the fact that, if these civilians were liable to be the people who were putting out the mines and booby traps. They were probably carrying messages for the VC, such things. We were aware of that. We never developed any means at all of distinguishing one from another. It couldn't be done.
American commanders never appreciated how far the Viet Cong had infiltrated South Vietnam cities. Ngo Thai's noodle bar was popular with American and South Vietnamese soldiers. It was also HQ for the most important Viet Cong cell in Saigon.
Even one of South Vietnam's top men, General Win Cao Ki, stopped by my restaurant to enjoy the food. He had no idea this was a key meeting place for the Liberation Army.
It was in this room that the Tet Offensive was planned. Yet as this planning went on upstairs, Toi served noodles to American soldiers downstairs.
This is almost a shrine to the Tet Offensive.
it really makes you aware of how significant tech was to the whole war.
US intelligence failed to detect Viet Cong planning for the Tet. Andrew Priest is piecing together the evidence, trying to find traces of the Communists' legendary supply route, the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
I really did want to get out and see for myself whether there was anything left of the trail, and also, perhaps more importantly, the kind of countryside that it went through.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a 1,000-mile lifeline for the North Vietnamese cause.
We called the Ho Chi Minh Trail Miracle Road.
A miracle that high-tech surveillance and intensive bombing still couldn't stop. After almost a week of heavy fighting, the Americans have regained control of Saigon. But elsewhere, the Communist Viet Cong are holding out, fueled by supplies and reinforcements from the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail was absolutely crucial to the Tet Offensive, to the preparation for it. It was absolutely necessary to get as much material, but also as many men down into the south in order for the Tet Offensive to be successful.
Andrew Priest has travelled to Quan Loc province in central Vietnam to search for traces that remain of the legendary 1,000-mile-long trail. Beginning in the north, around the Mu Gia and Ben Karai passes, the trail wound through eastern Laos and Cambodia before crossing the border into South Vietnam.
At the very beginning of the war, Ho Chi Minh Trail is rudimentary. It is literally walking trails through the jungle. And soldiers go through great hardship to make it down that trail. It's very difficult to move logistic support down that trail.
North Vietnamese photographs and US aerial reconnaissance material together begin to create a picture of how the trail worked.
Sophisticated simplicity was the key. The most obvious way to transport things along the Ho Chi Minh Trail was by foot, but also bicycles, for example, were vitally important. This gave them the advantage of great manoeuvrability and mobility.
There are relics of this US surveillance effort. ADSID was an air-delivered seismic intrusion detector. Adapted from technology designed to locate Soviet submarines, thousands were dropped over Vietnam.
What we have here is an actual piece of American equipment. This is an American remote sensor. It would have been dropped from an aircraft. It would have been coming through the jungle canopy, would have been going incredible speed, rotating. The idea was that most of this would have been buried under the soil. And what this was designed to do was to give the Americans information on the movement of the Viet Cong.
The ADSID could pick up the vibrations and even the body heat of passing soldiers. These signals would be relayed back to American bases. A pattern of increased activity would draw immediate bombing. Thousands of these were dropped in the region of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Yet American bombing still failed to hit the target.
For every technological advance there is in war, there's a dumb solution. And the Vietnamese were very, very good at coming up with solutions.
Just 30 miles from Saigon, it was a key communist stronghold known as the Iron Triangle.
This area was very important for both sides. The enemy knew if they couldn't destroy or take control here, then they might lose Saigon. We knew too that we had to hold on to this area, otherwise we wouldn't have any influence on Saigon.
On the edge of the Iron Triangle was Cu Chi, one of the most heavily bombed districts in the whole of South Vietnam.
Nếu bây giờ khách
People who visit Cu Chi now and see all the trees cannot imagine what it was like during the war. There was so much shelling and bombing by the Americans, as well as the toxic chemicals that they sprayed over the land. It was relentless, every single day. It seemed nothing could survive, not even an insect.
đánh nhau với Mỹ.
To move underground. In just a few months, thousands of fighters and their families dug an extraordinary complex of tunnels. This warren of interconnecting tunnels, 3 levels deep, would become their world for the next 10 years. Anthropologist Simone Clifford Yeager has come to Vietnam to find out more about the tunnels and the people who built them. The network stretched for 250 kilometers. The Americans never discovered its true extent. An entire American division even established its fortified base, not realizing the ground beneath was honeycombed with Viet Cong fighting tunnels. Despite the apparently unlikely surroundings, geology was in fact on the Viet Cong's side.
The geology around Cu Chi was very special because the soil around here is predominantly laterite clay with a ferric binder. It was easily workable, and it meant that the Viet Cong were able to construct this complex network, but at the same time, at the top, it actually dried similar to concrete. So, in essence, even though this ground looks rock hard, if you actually have a dig at it, it's pretty easy to work.
Tunnel trap doors were designed to be strong enough to resist armoured vehicles and were well camouflaged.
Where is it? Wow.
Very smart.
Such tiny trap doors meant that if discovered, none but the slightest built American soldier could follow the Viet Cong down inside.
Hands up, it's very easy for you. Alright. After that tonight you can to see fighting bunker.
So this is a loophole. Viet Cong sentries would have stood watch here and looked for any movement out in the jungle. This is the ideal height for either a man or a woman to stand and watch guard with a rifle on their shoulder, ready to fire at any intruders to the area. So it would have been effectively a sniper position, and looking at this from outside, it would have been incredibly well camouflaged, and the Americans out there wouldn't have known where the shots were coming from.
And these fighting bunkers were just the top layer at Cu Chi. The maze of tunnels is a reminder of the kind of enemy the Americans faced in Vietnam.
Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, written 2,500 years ago, said, "Know your enemy." We didn't know our enemy.
To truly understand what the Viet Cong were prepared to go through, Simone Clifford Yeager wants to experience for herself what life was like in the now derelict lower level tunnels.
Wow, these mushrooms. Just shows how incredibly damp it is down here that mushrooms are able to grow. It would have been pretty hard to breathe down here at the best of times, but with the dank air and the mushroom spores and everything, it would have taken some getting used to. Another incredible feature of the tunnel complex is the ventilation system. This here is a ventilation hole, and it runs right up to the surface, about 6 or 7 meters, and fed fresh air down into the tunnels below. But nevertheless, even though there were these tubes going up to the surface, the air in here is very close. Your lungs would have had to become acclimatized to the shallow breaths and the dampness, and a lot of breathing problems resulted from that.
whole families lived down here for years on end. There were schools, hospitals, even theatres in the tunnels. Resistance at Cu Chi continued throughout the Tet Offensive. The tunnel system was never defeated. But as this underground war continued, 100 miles to the north, the Americans were entangled in what would be the bloodiest battle of the entire...
The fighting was very, very fierce, but personally I felt proud, and I still feel proud, because I was fighting for independence, fighting for our people. Why would foreigners come here to kill our people, to kill our children? Our hearts were filled with hatred.
The emotions of Viet Cong fighters like Y began to find an echo in America.
Tet exposes psychologically that America may never ever be able to achieve a final victory over the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese insurgents. Because what Tet shows is that North Vietnam and South Vietnam are willing to stay the course, are willing to take large numbers of casualties, whereas the Americans that face them may not have that political will.
He believes the particular circumstances of the Vietnam War had dire consequences for the morale of American soldiers.
Being terrified in the context of the Vietnam War, I think it was a unique experience. You see the consequences of booby traps or the unseen enemy, your mates being killed, you can't go in to rescue them. No human being can cope with that indefinitely.
Morale is key to any army's success. The GI's morale was on a downward spiral, but as the Tet Offensive neared its bloody climax, the resolve of the Viet Cong showed no sign of weakening. The American army in Vietnam was a conventional force trained to fight traditional wars. But in the Viet Cong, they faced a wholly unconventional enemy.
The Viet Cong resistance wasn't just men fighting, it was women fighting, it was young people fighting, it was old people fighting, it was the whole community.
In Vietnam today, dozens of museums and memorials bear witness to the particular nature of America's enemy and what motivated them. The story of Vo Thi Chin is typical. From Cu Chi, she was a volunteer fighter from the age of 13.
My family was almost completely destroyed by American bombing. Only my mother escaped when our house was hit. The house was burnt down by the bomb, and all the rest of my family was killed. So, with such hatred in my heart and in my thoughts, I joined the army. I was so determined to fight, even though I was a girl.
This is the story of a small country named Vietnam, who has fought with the big military powers of the world. It is such a country who has paid the price of their sovereignty in this brutal war for a long period. At the start of 20th century, the leader like Ho Chi Minh has been raised, He has united the Vietnamese people. He happened to be a simple teacher, but his education and understanding on international relations came handy to launch a movement for their freedom. He formed Viet Minh in 1941. This is a nationalist communist regime, and his aim was the freedom and independence to Vietnam. In 1973, America decided to withdraw forces from Vietnam. Paris Peace Treaty was signed, and the American soldiers started returning back from Vietnam. But the struggle did not end. In 1975, when North Vietnamese soldiers landed in Saigon, the South Vietnam surrendered. The fall of Saigon was the end of Vietnam War. The country became one. The Socialist Republic of Vietnam was born. Vietnam War had devastated the country. More than 30 lakh people were died. Thousands of villages burnt, and the economy of the country was in shambles. But Vietnamese people never surrendered to this agony. They had rebuilt their nation. Today, Vietnam is a fast-moving economy, and the nation is enriched with overall development. The story of Vietnam War teaches us that whatever difficulties a nation faces, everything is possible with courage, struggle, and love for the motherland.